Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever put on a playlist to study or just, to relax or stare out the window on a rainy day, you've probably listened to the exact kind of music we're dissecting today.
Absolutely. It's everywhere now.
It really is. We are exploring the evolution of lo-fi folk and bedroom folk. And we aren't just talking about a genre of music here. We're talking about how the actual physical space of a cramped bedroom and the severe limitations of really cheap technology fundamentally rewired how modern music sounds.
And how we emotionally connect to it, too.
Right, exactly.
It really is a remarkable story of adaptation. For today's deep dive, we're pulling from this highly detailed music history column. It was published back in December of 2025.
By Mr. Wright.
Yes, written by an author going by Nister for Monumental Movement Records, or MMR. Our mission today is to look at how artists took massive technical constraints, like having zero budget and zero access to those glossy multi-million-dollar recording studios.
The kind with the massive mixing boards.
Exactly. How they took that lack of access and somehow turned those very limitations into a deeply intimate, highly influential aesthetic that basically took over the world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really get how revolutionary the shift was, we kind of have to rewind a bit.
Right back to the 1970s.
Yeah, the 70s. This is when the seed of the home-recorded folk song really started to germinate. And it wasn't driven by some grand artistic manifesto, which is the crazy part. It was driven entirely by consumer tech.
By accessibility.
Yes. You finally had cheap cassette decks and consumer tape recorders hitting the market. For the first time, artists didn't need to rent out professional spaces. They were literally just taking a basic dynamic microphone and plugging it directly into a tape deck on their living room floor.
And we should probably clarify what a dynamic microphone is in this context, just so you, the listener, can really picture this.
Oh, good point.
We are talking about the kind of rugged, heavy microphone a stand-up comedian drops on stage at a local club. We are not talking about the delicate, ultra-sensitive studio mics that pick up a pin drop.
Right, the ones that cost thousands of dollars.
Right. So when you plug one of those heavy dynamic mics straight into a cheap cassette deck, you are absolutely not getting high-fidelity audio.
Not even close.
You are getting an unmixed, one-take recording. But what's fascinating here is the sheer unvarnished reality of that audio. It was completely saturated with ambient room sounds. It captured the exact physical distance between the singer, the acoustic guitar, and the literal air in the room.
Wait, but coming from an era where the public was so used to these pristine, highly produced studio albums.
Like the Beatles or Pink Floyd.
Yeah. Did this just sound terrible to people at first? Like, how did listeners transition from seeing room noise and tape as bad quality to seeing it as an actual artistic choice?
That's the crucial pivot right there. It did sound rough to the mainstream ear at first.
I bet.
But for a growing subculture, that roughness became a badge of authenticity. It was the complete antithesis of corporate rock. It felt raw. It was unpolished.
Felt real.
Exactly. It perfectly preserved the feeling of being in that specific space at that specific moment. It felt honest in a way that a pristine studio recording sometimes just didn't.
That makes a lot of sense. It's less about capturing the perfect note and more about capturing the air around the note. But the real game changer doesn't arrive until the 1980s and 90s, right?
Correct. The MMR column points to the multi-track revolution as the moment this movement really found its legs.
Specifically, the arrival of cheap 4-track cassette recorders, like the Tascam Porta Studio. Suddenly, you aren't just doing a one-take live recording into a boombox. A solo artist sitting on the edge of their bed could record a guitar part, physically rewind the cassette, record themselves singing over it, and then add a harmony track.
It was revolutionary. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this technological leap married two crucial cultural forces. First, you had the booming indie label cassette culture of the 90s.
Where people were just trading tapes through the mail.
Right. And second, you had this brand new sonic signature that came specifically from these 4-track machines. Because when you layer sound on a cassette tape over and over, you get this phenomenon known as tape saturation.
Let's break that down for a second. Tape saturation is basically the audio equivalent of an overexposed photograph, right?
That is a great way to visualize it. Yes, when you push audio signals onto magnetic tape, the loud sounds literally overwhelm the magnetic particles.
The tape just can't handle it.
Right. It can't handle the sharp, piercing, high frequencies, so it naturally compresses them and rounds them off. It creates this very warm, fuzzy, distinctly saturated sound.
It's that classic lo-fi warmth.
Exactly. And because of this, the 4-track era officially validated home recording. It was no longer just a rough demo tape to show a record label so you could get real studio time. The home recording itself became a fully valid, respected medium of personal expression.
The medium became the message. And knowing that perfectly sets the stage for what the column calls the golden era of this genre, which brings us right into the early 2000s.
A huge turning point.
Huge. Now, to help you wrap your head around what this era felt like, you have to remember what was dominating the charts back then. You had NSYNC, Britney Spears, massive new metal bands.
Everything was polished to a blinding shine.
Yes. Listening to those massive studio-produced albums is like listening to a polished public speech in a crowded, brightly lit auditorium. But listening to these early 2000s bedroom folk albums, it's like someone handed you their personal diary and you're reading it by flashlight under the covers.
That's a perfect analogy. It was a drastic, necessary counter-movement. And the source points to two massive, foundational pillars of this era that really define that diary under the covers sound. The first is Iron and Wine.
Sam Beam's project.
Yes, the project of singer-songwriter Sam Beam. And we are talking specifically about his 2002 breakout album, The Creek Drank the Cradle.
Oh man, that album is legendary. And the story behind it is exactly what we were talking about today. He wasn't in a studio. He was literally just sitting in his Florida living room and bedroom. He was mixing cassette multi-track recordings with some early digital setups.
That's right.
But the key here, and this is my favorite part of the Iron and Wine lore, is that because he was in a normal house, he was presumably trying not to wake up his family. So the recording was done at a remarkably low volume.
The low volume is entirely the secret ingredient to that record's success. Because he had to play his guitar and sing so quietly, the microphones had to be positioned incredibly close to him just to pick up a signal.
Right, they were right up against his mouth and the strings.
Exactly. And this results in what audio engineers call the proximity effect. You hear these incredibly intimate whispering vocals. You hear the physical friction, like every single distinct finger squeak on the acoustic guitar strings.
It's so visceral.
It creates this unbelievable illusion of presence. You feel like you are sitting cross-legged on the rug right next to him while he plays.
And then you have pillar number 2 of the golden era, Sufjan Stevens. Specifically his early work around 2004, like the album Seven Swans. Now, Sufjan's approach was slightly different. He operated as a one-man band, playing multiple instruments himself, but still completely at home.
Yes, and while Sam Beam was capturing the accidental magic of a quiet house, Sufjan was engaging in what we might call highly engineered intimacy. The article details how Sufjan actively manipulated his microphone placement, specifically to minimize the sound reflecting off his bedroom walls.
Because he didn't want that typical bedroom sound.
Right, he was trying to avoid that hollow, echoey sound of a standard drywall bedroom.
Wait, I want to pause there for a second.
Yeah.
If he's actively trying to minimize wall reflections and control the acoustics, isn't he just trying to recreate a professional studio in his bedroom? How is that still bedroom folk if he's actively fighting the room?
That is a fantastic point of distinction, but he wasn't trying to eliminate the room entirely. He was trying to tame it so he could use it creatively. In a professional studio, they build floating floors and non-parallel walls to create an acoustically dead space. Sufjan didn't have that.
So what did he do?
He used incredibly close mic placement to get the direct sound of the banjo or the organ, but he still actively utilized the natural, uncontrollable reverb of the house itself. He mixed it all completely self-contained. The resulting sound is iconic. It features that signature tape-like roughness from the previous decade, but combined with those incredibly close, whispering vocals. He wasn't erasing the bedroom. He was just learning how to play it like an instrument.
Learning to play the room like an instrument. I love that.
Yeah.
Knowing how Sufjan and Sam Beam manipulated those spaces makes me wonder about the actual physical setups of the everyday musicians trying to do this. I mean, they didn't have thousands of dollars for soundproof booths.
Yeah.
So how are they actually pulling this off?
Well, this raises an important question about what we actually value in music. The core philosophy of bedroom folk is the total embrace of technical limitations.
Embracing the flaws.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The constraints were not viewed as obstacles to be overcome. They were embraced as fundamental characteristics of the sound. The flaws were the features.
And the DIY setups, the sourceless, are incredible. I guarantee you have some of this stuff in your house right now. Artists were using mini-disc recorders, cheap early digital multi-tracks, and mics that were basically designed for voice dictation.
Just everyday office equipment, really.
Yeah. And for soundproofing, forget professional acoustic foam panels. They were draping blankets over chairs. They were sinking directly into bookshelves because the books would absorb the sound waves. They were hanging heavy winter curtains to deaden the room. It sounds like building a childhood blanket fort, but for existential crises.
A blanket fort for existential crises is a surprisingly accurate description. And the result of that DIY environment is what the MMR column refers to as micro noises. Think about this. Major high-end commercial studios spend millions of dollars on architectural sound isolation to completely eliminate the very noises that became the soul of bedroom folk.
Right. If a chair squeaks in $1 million studio, they stop the take and fire the intern who bought the chair. But in bedroom folk, those sounds are the entire point. I want you, listening right now, to just pause and imagine the sounds in your own room. Maybe it's the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, or the hiss of the AC vent, or the floorboards creaking when you shift your weight.
In this genre, those micro noises weren't edited out. The heavy, tactile squeaks of the guitar strings, the rustling of a flannel shirt sleeve against the wood of the guitar, they left all of it in on purpose.
Because it makes it real.
Exactly. Those micro noises provide an undeniable sense of reality. They anchor the music in the physical world. It reminds the listener that a human being actually made this in a real place in real time. And if we connect this sonic intimacy to the lyrical content, a beautiful, natural parallel emerges.
How so?
Because the music was being created in a quiet, isolated, private space, literally a bedroom, the lyrics naturally gravitated toward the introspective.
That is such a crucial connection. You aren't going to sing stadium anthems at a whisper while sitting on your mattress.
Precisely. The lyrical themes of bedroom folk are deeply personal. They focus on the minutiae of daily life, memories of family and home, and close personal relationships. There is often a quiet religious or spiritual contemplation in the writing. And crucially, there is a distinct thematic step away from the noise, chaos, and bustle of the city.
The lyrics mirror the physical isolation of the recording space.
The bedroom is a sanctuary, both sonically and thematically.
So we've got the raw 70s, the cassette-heavy 80s and 90s, and the golden era of the early 2000s where the genre really found its identity. But the jump from analog tape to digital changes the whole equation. Because once the 2010s hit, nobody actually needed to sound lo-fi anymore.
That's where the paradigm shifts again.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Technology takes another massive leap. In the 2010s, we see the absolute explosion of DIWs, digital audio workstations.
Right. Programs like Pro Tools, GarageBand, and Logic. A DAW is basically an entire professional recording studio consolidated into software on your laptop. Combine that with the sudden availability of decent-sounding, plug-and-play USB microphones, and suddenly, home recording is universally accessible. The barrier to entry completely dissolved.
And with that, the boundaries start to blur. Folk music starts mixing with electronic and ambient music, giving rise to this new subgenre called bedroom pop. And what fascinated me in the column is that while the audio quality inherently became much clearer and more pristine because digital recording doesn't have tape hiss, the aesthetic choice remained the same. Artists actively chose to keep that room feel in their mixes.
Yes, the 2010s represented a massive democratization of music production, but also a shift in intent. They liked the intimacy of the lo-fi era, even if they no longer had to record to a hiss-filled cassette tape. They were adding artificial vinyl crackle or tape distortion plugins to their pristine digital tracks.
It's almost ironic.
It is. There was even a cultural reevaluation and depreciation of the old cassette culture that emerged online during this time. It proved that the bedroom sound wasn't just a symptom of poverty or lack of access. It was a deeply desired artistic flavor.
Which brings us right to the present day. The 2020s. According to the history we are looking at, we are currently living in an era of acoustic return and what they are calling post-lo-fi.
Post-lo-fi is a fascinating concept because it shows how the genre has fundamentally matured. Today, high-quality condenser microphones, which, unlike those old dynamic mics, are incredibly sensitive and capture a massive frequency range, are cheaper than ever.
Anyone can buy one online for $100.
Easily. The software plugins are incredibly sophisticated, and learning how to properly tune your room for recording is just a YouTube tutorial away. The result is a shift toward a more static, minimalist approach. It places a huge emphasis on raw, live recording, but with a major difference. The overt, harsh noise of the past, like heavy tape hiss or muddy distortion, is largely reduced.
So it's like they finally have the technology to make it sound perfect, but instead of making it sound like a sterile pop studio, they're using that high-end technology to perfectly capture the imperfections of reality. They're using 4K cameras to film the dust motes in the air, so to speak.
That is an excellent analogy. It is a synthesis of eras. The modern era of bedroom folk relies on high-resolution recordings, but it still completely values what the column calls the realism of daily life. The obvious, distracting tape noise might be gone, but that immense, intimate closeness, the feeling of the singer's breath, the micro noises of the room, the feeling of them sitting right next to you, remains the driving force of the genre.
It's a high-resolution intimacy.
High-resolution intimacy, exactly.
So what does this all mean for us as listeners? As we wrap up today's deep dive, I think the big takeaway here is incredibly inspiring. The evolution of lo-fi folk and bedroom folk proves that you do not need a massive, multi-million-dollar studio to make a lasting emotional impact on the world.
You really don't.
By turning the physical living environment into a musical instrument itself, these artists showed us that you just need to capture the genuine texture of life. There is immense, undeniable power in capturing the simple intimacy of a small voice in a quiet room.
I couldn't agree more. And I would ask you, the listener, to try an experiment based on what we've unpacked today. The next time you put on your headphones to listen to your favorite acoustic or indie tracks, pay closer attention than you normally would. Don't just listen to the melody or the lyrics. Listen for the room.
I love that idea.
Try to hear the physical space between the microphone and the guitar. Listen for the intake of breath before the chorus. Listen for the creaking floorboards or the rustle of a sleeve. Once you start noticing the physical space preserved in the recording, you will experience the music in a profoundly deeper, more human way.
I am definitely going to do that on my commute tomorrow. I'm going to be listening for chair squeaks. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, lingering question to ponder on your own. We've just spent all this time exploring how the literal flaws of cheap cassette tapes, low volume limits, and unmixed room noise became the very soul and defining characteristic of an entire musical movement.
An incredibly powerful movement.
So look around at the digital technology we are using today. What modern digital flaws or limitations right now, bandwidth compression, algorithmic quirks, AI glitches, or Zoom audio dropouts, are secretly birthing the next massive musical movement right under our noses. Keep your ears open. Thanks for joining us today, and keep exploring.